Jinendra, let's start with the Nokar mantra. Om Namo Arihantanam, Om Namo Sittanam, Om Namo Ayadiyanam, Om Namo Ujayanam, Namo Luve Savasahunam, Eso Panchanamo Karo, Salva Pavapanasano, Mangalalancha Salvesim, Paramam Have Mangalam, Paramam Have Mangalam. The focus of Dad's class has always been how to take Jainism out of the classroom and into our everyday life. But what good is a philosophy if it doesn't guide you through extraordinary times as well? As all of you know, but for the benefit of our international friends, last week we experienced a multi-day power outage due to below freezing temperatures. That left us stuck with no heat, no water, and no electricity for 4 to 5 days while snow blanketed everything. In addition, cell phone service and texting were hit and miss as well 2 weeks ago. So I want to hear your stories, especially if you used any Jain principles during the emergency, or even if you used principles of mindfulness or meditation or anikantvad, which we talked about last time, or anything we talked about during the class. I want to hear what happened to you 2 weeks ago. Was anybody able to help another family or friend or perhaps even a stranger?
Yeah, I was. We had we didn't have power and heat, of course, but we had water and gas for cooking and showers the whole time. And my in-laws had a busted pipe, so they came over, stayed with us for a couple days, able to help them cap off their pipe so they could get water back in their house. Shoveled a few people's driveways around the neighborhood. So, as a kid, once it started warming up and kids got stir crazy, wanted to go outside and play around. So, making sure there weren't any ice patches that they could slip on. Boiled water for drinking.
So does anybody know why Jainism recommends that we boil water even in non-emergency times for drinking? That is, why should we boil water? Why is it that water gets bad after a certain time, but I can go drink out of a lake that's been standing there for 100 years? I don't understand. Does anybody understand?
I don't know the lake part, but why boil water, what I understood is that there is certain number of bacteria or other organisms in the water that by consuming it, you would kill, right? And in between the time where you enters your mouth until you digest it, the bacteria would multiply even more. So if you you're going to have to kill some inadvertently anyway, and so if you kind of cap the number before you consume it, you're preventing harming an even larger number later on.
Right, so that's right. And it's even before it enters your mouth. As you leave the water there, the bacteria in the water continuously multiply. So if you're going to drink the water anyway, it's better to boil it. You're going to kill things regardless, which is violence. But it's better to kill less things. So after you boil it, there's no bacteria, the water is sterilized. You end up ultimately killing less living beings by boiling the water. Was anybody else able to help another family or friend or stranger?
Timur, I would like to just quickly add one more thing on the boiling water part.
Sure.
What I learned, I mean, they say that, the boiled water is good for a certain time period. It's not good for the entire day. And that is tied to that because after a certain amount of time, those bacteria starts coming, I guess, becoming alive again or generates bacteria, and again, kind of the cycle goes on. That's why the water is good for certain hours after it's boiled. And that's the same principle. I just wanted to add that because that's, we can't just drink, from Jainism perspective, we can't just boil the water in the morning and consume rest of the day or next day, and enough, you need it for several hours and then do it again and so on.
Okay, great point.
So, Tim, we were able to help our in-laws. They came over. They didn't have any power, and so yeah. I mean, quite frankly, we had. I wasn't quite thinking what, from a Jainism perspective, I should be doing. I was just thinking how I can help whoever needs our help. And we were fortunate enough not to lose power for a long time. I mean, we lost power here and there, but not for long. So, I was happy to help. We were happy to help our in-laws, but I wanted to ask you and the group, in times like this, when obviously people go through hardships and stuff. I mean, you offer, right? You offer what you can, but do you feel like you should go beyond this, just merely offering? And do you actively go out and say, no, here is what I'm going to do? I mean, how do you look at it? How do you view this, these kinds of situations, or the group and in general?
Okay, so how active should we be in offering our help if we're in a position to help? Does anybody have an answer?
I don't know if they answer the question or not, but I believe that we should maximize our ability and try to go beyond. And it's just not that I've done that all the time, but I think that is the right thing to do because that helps our karmas. And actually, in the other way, it helps because imagine if you were not doing that, we would do something else, right? I mean, watching a Netflix show or binge series or something like that, which can add to our karmas, where this will, if not destroy our karmas, but it can help build good karmas.
Well, for us, I think it was, to answer Paresh's point, it's not more than just open the doors and, any strangers just come in the house. I don't think would be a practical approach that I think, but calling few folks here and there, making sure they're aware. We saw a lot of messages on our network group. If anybody needs some help, opening that way actually kind of helps you in a direction. If you have that. If you have that options to offer any kind of help, we do. I did drive around a couple of places to have help my friend open their garage to get the car out. We have two families with us. We all did not have power at the same time, but they did not have water as well, and they did not have something else, heat in the house. So, one lost the ceiling in the house. So there was time that we were trying to help whichever means we could. We have rations in our groceries. You could not have groceries. You did not have enough. Whatever we had with us, we kind of, shared with it. And it did cross my mind, like how our sadhus, live the entire life like this, without any
and he's such a headache too. Hey, like, okay, what a mess we have created for ourselves as well. So it does help. It did help us on different types of thought process. How we approach the situation. We become a little more creative to help, to creative for yourself. But not everything was directed towards either doing karma or no karma or anything on that. It could be indirect, but that is how the things, most of us did approach that way, I believe.
So the answer to your question is you should try to help as much as you can until it starts becoming a detriment. So until your help starts resulting in violence, or until your help starts resulting in other people having their, for example, other people hurting other people's feelings too much by helping. So you should maximize your help until it starts becoming a detriment. Was anybody? Sorry, go ahead.
So checking in on people, saying, "Do you need any help?" Right. All of that is great and almost intuitive, natural for people to do. Taking that maybe a few steps further to demonstrate that you're asking in a sincere way and actually willing to help, right? So that
you should definitely do that.
I think a lot of people's natural reactions to it will be, well, I don't want to impose on Shetu or whoever's offering me the help. I don't want to put my burden on them. So whether it's words or small actions to show that you really mean what you say and that you're open to it, right? That will help get to the point where they're more willing. They may be more willing to actually accept your help. But of course, you can't, or I don't think you should impose or, like Timur was saying, take it to a point where it makes them uncomfortable, right? I'm not going to grab people out of their house to say, I have power and water, you don't, so you're coming with me.
Right, exactly, because that would be a type of violence. So thank you to everybody who just joined. We're talking about the events of 2 weeks ago. Was anybody too proud to accept help? Was anybody able to teach their children any lessons?
Three days without internet was a lot of lessons in there.
So tell me,
candlelight.
What did Shreya learn?
Learned that I think creativity is rooted in boredom a lot of times.
Right.
Where if you allow yourself to get bored enough, then your senses and your creativity will be open to the things beyond the rectangle screen in her hands, and we'll find ways to entertain. We'll find ways to help people and see that people are in need. So when my in-laws were at our house, and they're obviously old. They have slowed to move around the house. They have one of them has some vision problems, so especially at night and in the dark, hard to move around. So she was really great helping them around, and it's I think we're proud that she has always demonstrated that, but it's always a good refreshing reminder that everyone's going through their own thing, and everyone can use a little, even the smallest bits of help. But you have to, to the earlier conversation, you have to be there and show that you're ready and willing to help, and just do it without being asked to do it.
Right.
So maybe that's something I learned from her, not something she learned necessarily through that.
Like Temer, for us, there was a lot of discussion around not taking things for granted.
Right.
With my son, I think we talked for almost entire week, talking about how my childhood was, where internet was not something very common. That's one. And second is, how we can make best utilize our time when you don't have these things. I think it helped a lot of good conversation. And we ended up doing so. I was one of the fortunate ones where we had power outage, but it didn't last very long, from evening to next day early morning. But still, that gave us chance to not only talk, but do a few things that we won't do normally in normal days when everything is fine. So that was one. Second item I want to talk about is Setu mentioned about, even reaching out to people and offering help and just small actions. I think that makes difference. And I experienced that because, like I said, I was one of the fortunate ones. But when that happened, I had lots of people calling me because they knew that I live in this area, calling me and offering their help. And that gave me a lot of comfort feeling, right? And I didn't had to use that help because I was fine. But at least I knew that if this power outage continued beyond 10, 12 hours or whatever we had, then I had a backup and I had people who would help me. That just put me at comfort. I was not worried. And I had options and I felt that this really helps when somebody calls and just talks to you and offers for help. And I think that's something that we should be able to do at very minimum. If we are not able to drive across the town and help someone, but even a phone call and offering for help and maybe just small actions, I think those things count a lot, especially during these times of hardship. So that was my personal experience.
So what you just described is exactly what Jainism does for you, in that you know that things will be okay, even during trying circumstances, because you know that your soul will be reincarnated when you die. You know that you are working on your karma. You know the truth. And so you are able to endure hardships because you have that lifeline to cling to. You have that backup. You have options because you know the truth that, these hardships are not going to last. These hardships are a result of my karma. These hardships that I'm going through are transitory. I can get through this. And if I die, that's only something that happens to my body. That's not something that happens to my soul. I am going to continue on the spiritual path that I started. So that kind of lifeline, that confidence that we have in facing hardships is exactly what Jainism provides to us. I think that we've established that not many of us thought about Jainism during the emergency, but now that I brought your mind to that point, is there anything that you would have liked to have remembered during the emergency about Jainism? Is there anything that now you think about it, I should have taken that time to do X, Y, and Z, or I should have thought about this principle of Jainism?
I think the meditation aspect was something that I wish I was more present about that week, just because there was so much more space to practice it and fewer distractions. So that would have been a really good opportunity to go deeper and practice that.
Right. And we didn't take advantage of that time that we had because we weren't able to adapt that quickly to new circumstances and think about how we could use the opportunity. Kaushik's story about connecting with his son reminded me about when the pandemic first started. We discussed in this dad's class Well, it's kind of, I'm looking at the silver lining. It's a blessing in disguise. You know, my social calendar isn't filling up. I'm having more time to do these things. And I said to that person who's not here now, I said the challenge is, well, when things go back to quote unquote normal, are you going to learn the lessons from this pandemic and stop filling up your social calendar so you can have a better quality of life? And so Kaushik used this opportunity to connect with his son. And the challenge is, are we going to recreate the circumstances of a power outage because we know the benefits of it, or because we know that we have an opportunity here to connect with our children? Are we going to learn the lessons that this taught us? Or, now that the power's back, have we continued our life as normal?
I still have a tub full of water just in case.
So did anybody learn anything about themselves or their family during this emergency? And it doesn't have to be about Jainism. It could be something you learned about yourself or your family that you didn't know before. Shetu brought up the example of his daughter.
We got some calls from the people that we haven't talked to for years, for sure. So that tells me that they do keep a tab on the things, and those friends, school friends that we lost touch maybe about 20, 25 years ago, they did call us. So something tells us that, yeah, it's important that you keep in touch with people, whether who cares for you. And like Shetu says and Kaushik says, I think it's important to keep reminding each other in the good time as well. The importance of what's critical, what's the important, what part is you should be focusing, whether it's a good time or bad time. You should continue, be mindful about where you are and what you want to do, whether it's a good time, bad time, whatever the time it is.
How did that make you feel? Because it's not a given that it would make you feel good to hear from somebody after 20 years only during an emergency.
But it's not. It's and it was a brief discussion about you know the current state. It was more about revisiting the memory lane on the good part and bad time and good time back in India, and how this journey has put this individual to the place where he cannot be on a social media. He had trouble back in there. He's not looking for any help. But in general, he was very, very humble, very, touchy person. And that all it did is to okay, we generally close certain paths and move on. But people hold off things that you may have done back then, the small gestures he remembered 25 years ago, and he reciprocated by calling me on that. So something unusual.
It's probably important to separate calling and reaching out versus
doing the
thinking, right? Because
yeah.
I'm sure you and him both for the last 20 years have always kept each other, reminded of those same memories. They didn't just disappear, and all of a sudden you got the phone call, and we do that with lots of people and relatives as well. And parents, right? We're always thinking about them, but what a difference a phone call or a text message makes.
Did anybody come to any realizations during their time in adversity?
So, Tim, I think what we realized after kind of thinking about it for a bit, it was mainly what we were afraid of is the material property that we own and damage to it. We realized very quickly that just to survive, we need very little. I Kaushik mentioned about the short duration of outage, and I had like calls said, "Hey, come over right now," with such a good, gesture, and we chose to stay. First, it was not too long, but then we realized that all we needed is enough blankets to survive the cold part. We have water. The biggest worry was if you kind of isolate what was needed versus what was happening during the environment. The groceries, the food, I mean, somebody may say, okay, I didn't have milk or, the organic milk I want, but you have something to survive. So survival was really not a matter at that point, other than those who are on the street. I'm talking about most of the people we know or are around. The most concern I had, for honest, is like, okay, what about, if a pipe busts? I would want to bust a pipe in the outside versus inside. I don't want the roof to come down with water. Those were the things which are generated by ourselves. I mean, we had the same discussion, the board games out, sitting by the fireplace. I mean, probably one of the most memorable moment we had during that outage. So I think if we just separate the things that we, in the time period, we had what we need, a roof, a blanket, a shelter, a food or energy. What we did not have is what we did not need. And what was adding to our stress and problem is the things we own and possess. More mainly like house and roof stuff.
Right. So now you've hit upon what people realize when they realize that the things you own enslave you. The material possessions you own enslave your brain cycles because now you're worried about them. When you realize how little you need to survive, you realize how much of your life you can shed if you want to focus on your spirituality. And if that's your ultimate goal, well, how much of what surrounds us can we get rid of? And the answer is 99% of it, if not 100% of it, right? And so we have, that's a great realization to have, and it's a great realization. And going forward, as I mentioned earlier, if we're going to learn our lessons, that are we going to start shedding the possessions because we don't need them and we realize they're enslaving us? Are we going to, maybe if we don't do that, are we going to put ourselves in situations where we see, well, what is really the amount I need to survive? Am I going to purposefully put myself in those situations? Well, now we know why we take vows, or now we know, well, if I can't do that for my life, let me just try it for a couple of hours or a couple of days. Or if I can't do that, well, let me go out camping and see really what it is that I need and how resourceful I am and how much I can rely on strangers and things like that. And so that's how a sadhu might have lived, or a sadhvi might have lived while walking around India.
The thing or quote is like, the things that are important in life are not things. When you said camping, I guess I have a little confession to make, right? Because I was in camping mode, and we had relatives in the city who had power and everything, and they kind of invited us over, but kind of used the situation knowing that our property or our lives or were really never at risk, right? It was uncomfortable for a few days, but we were never at risk. But I thought it would be a good exercise to go through with the family, right? To see how resourceful are we when kind of pushed outside of our comfort zone. How easily can we adapt, and what are and where we failed at it or where we weren't able to, then helped us think about what do we need to do to be able to prepare it the next time. I think you know, for many of us, those who were here during Harvey a few years ago, right, went through probably one cycle of that, and then every year. I mean, I know I've had busted sprinklers 3 or 4 times since I moved here, and you learn your little lessons over the years, and thankfully this year we didn't, right? But unless you allow yourself into those situations and not just run away from them at the first chance, it's hard for me at least to learn how to grow out of them.
Did anybody go crazy? Or did anybody have somebody in their family go crazy? Like wild with emotions and upset, and that's perfectly fine. That's a normal reaction.
Actually, I thought my son would go crazy like that, wild with emotion and stuff. But surprisingly, he wasn't. He wasn't going crazy. He was like, "Man, when is this thing going to come back?" So no, no, I didn't. We didn't have that kind of an experience.
That's great. So you learned something about him, and he might have learned something about himself too.
I doubt it very much, but but there's always hope, Tim.
We'll turn off the power next weekend. See what happens.
Right, and that's what I'm talking about. Using learning our lessons, right? And understanding that, hey, this is a situation we can create. We can turn off our phones. We can turn off the TV. We can turn off the internet. They have on and off switches, right? We can do that. And maybe now we can teach our kids the benefits of doing that. Well, hey, let's just do it this evening, Let's just turn off the phones this evening. We'll break the board game out by the fireplace, just like we did 2 weeks ago, and we'll see if we can have some fun there. Or we'll see if we can meditate together. Or we'll see if, hey, maybe this Jainism thing does have something to tell us about ourselves and something to tell us about the truth about our lives.
One other kind of story in our neighborhood, which I thought was, it was pretty amazing, right? And it was, 1 or 2 neighbors who had some plumbing tools. And it started off with that. It says, hey, I have these odds and ends part. I'll put it on my front porch with some tools. If you need it, grab it, and when you finish, return it. And then people around the neighborhood who had a few spare parts and stuff started bringing it to his porch, and it became like this, what do they call it, the little library or the little pantry, right, where you can add and take things away. And they got coordinated it to a point where he had a cousin or something in Louisiana, and the Lowe's and Home Depots there had stock of a lot of things that we needed here. So somebody drove like 300 miles to meet halfway and pick up some goods, right? They're not Jain, they're not Indian, right? But as a community, right, it's kind of the responsibility, obligation, reassurance. I don't know, just lots of the warm feelings and adjectives that you don't need to. There are a lot of people who come to the same actions that we were talking about, right? It's not because of Jainism, right, necessarily, but because of who people are. They're good people of all walks and all faiths.
Certainly. Did anybody see any response from our Jain Center? And should there have been a response? And if there should have been a response and there was no response, is that our duty now? Should we be the response team? Because we helped out, we called our neighbors, we called our friends and families, Bhavin received a call from somebody he knew 20 years ago. But should there have been a response from our Jain Center? Is that the duty of our Jain Center, is to help our community? There's no right answer. You could say no, and I could believe you if you have good reasons.
Timur, what I've seen some. I mean, directly from Jain Center, no, not that I know of. But I've seen internally in the neighborhoods. Like, for example, we have a group, Jains at Aliana. I'm sure there is one for different neighborhoods. And I'm sure there was some interaction. There was some good sharing of information on those groups. And I remember, I mean, there's a Gujarati saying says, Pehlo sago de padosi, meaning the first relative is your neighbor. And I think that applies to this more because an inability to get on streets and things like that. But I do know a family that I think pretty much everybody knows had 3 or 4 friends and families at their house. We were open. We told them, anybody we knew, but like, for example, we could have definitely accepted more folks here at our house since we had water and electricity most of the time. So if there was a feasibility and probability, I think there could have been a little bit more in helping connecting those who need versus those who had resources. And sure, like you said, we could have helped. I think we had messages on our group, but maybe it could have been a bit sooner and things like that. So answer is yes, but it's kind of easy to say now than in the time because it was an uncertain time. Nobody knew what's and how it's going to go from there. So it's the I guess something that we can learn from for sure.
Right. And I would have liked to have, I don't know that it hasn't necessarily been the responsibility of the Jain Center to reach out and connect the community together. I would have liked to have had more communication maybe, and maybe more connecting of people in need versus to people with resources. But maybe that's not right, maybe people belong to different communities. You had a neighborhood community response. We had some in our little dad's class group. And, maybe we should have had a Jain community response. I'm not sure. I know that a lot of other Jain centers did organize really well. For example, the Jain Center in Austin had people, they had power and water, and they had people shelter in the Jain Center itself. There were a couple of numbers you could call for people with resources if you needed to go to somebody's house. So they had a response at that level. And, maybe it's a little jealousy or envy on my part, but maybe not. Maybe there should be a response. And of course, if we say there should be a response, it's up to us to provide that response, and it's up to us to organize it. So maybe one of the things we can do is make a disaster document, what should be happening, or, that's something we can present to the Jain Center. Anybody interested in this idea? And does anybody think it's a bad idea? I'm open to that too.
I do think it's actually a good idea, Tim. I agree with you. At a community level, we should have at least explored whether we can help our other community members. The problem, in a situation like this, everybody's trying to fend off for themselves, right? Everybody is in the same kind of difficult situation. And so logistically, it is a difficult, endeavor. I don't want to downplay that, but it's at least something. I like your idea. At least something to explore. Let's see if there is something we can come up with.
I can tell you from personal experience. Here even in the small neighborhood here, it's definitely helpful and useful for the community to have it. and I'll give you a use case for it. I mean, there are a lot of seniors around. And sometimes, I mean, the seniors know things, but they're unable to do things. We had a house here in Aliana, a non-Jain house, pretty close. We can just walk from here. Had a stream of water coming out of the roof. Somebody noticed and put it on our neighborhood group page that somebody has this water shooting out of the roof. And the other neighbor goes out and knocks on his door. There was only one woman inside the house. She did not want to open the door. She knew this was going on. She did not know what to do. And her husband was was away and things like that. My only thought is that, we have a Jain senior lives on that street, right? Like 2 downs, and we just weren't sure. So we called them and he said, no, everything is fine at his place. There are things that sometimes people don't know what to do. Sometimes people have trust. Like, for example, how do I trust somebody just knocks on my door, especially in a situation like this? So if somebody with you that calls you and talks to you about it, I think it makes it much easier than an unknown person knocking on your door and helping you. Especially if you don't have like electricity and things like that. So yeah, it can be helpful because a lot of people are debating what to do. What do I drain? Do I just drip it? Small things like that. So if you have a to-go forum, then it makes it easier.
Right. And so, maybe the first part of a disaster scenario is to contact all of our members, or maybe we have identified seniors, for example, to use your example, maybe we can just contact all the seniors, see what they need. That could be one part. And maybe we could have a volunteer group, and maybe that could be Dad's class to organize things, because it's as simple as the example about plumbing tools, right? Just that there was a place to exchange plumbing tools and return plumbing tools. That made everybody use it as that thing, right? And so it's as simple as maybe we are the people that make the calls and that direct the traffic, right? And that doesn't have to be a lot of work, but maybe it's worth exploring whether that there's some response that we could provide for the Jain Center. Any other questions or comments about using Jainism in an emergency? And it doesn't have to be this emergency. It could be one that you've experienced previously.
Hey, Tim, going back to your previous question about how the disaster response could have been, just out of curiosity, do you know or anybody knows if Jain Center had power and water?
I do not know.
Okay. I mean, that can be part of the future discussion, right? If
sure.
That class, and I'll be part of that volunteer team, right? I would like to help. But also in some of these situations, like we had a lot of big warehouses and places where they provided shelter for people. And this probably we can do maybe for seniors or something, right? During these times.
Right.
Where at least they can come in and spend some time. So something to think about in future events.
Right, certainly. And we had a kind of confounding factor of the COVID, right? I mean, this thing was like the ultimate super spreader event because basically nobody cared about if you had COVID or not. They just cared if you had power or not, right? That doesn't matter.
Yep.
So maybe there would have been some liability issues had we gotten everybody in the same place and then that became a super spreader event. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't create some kind of disaster plan or something like that. And there was the fact that, I went to my in-laws' house and they lost power. And then we went to a friend's house and they lost power. We went to about 4 houses. We were following power like wildebeest follow the rain in Africa. We were just migrating to places with power. So if we had, for example, all sheltered at the Jain Center or gotten seniors to shelter there and they lost power, that would have been unfortunate too, right? So If we do something, we have to do it well. I mean, we can't do it ad hoc. And of course, we have to present it to the leadership and get their approval. And maybe they have better ideas about disaster recovery and helping our members through disasters using Jain principles.
I can tell you from that angle, I think it's the full responsibility of the temple to go ahead and interact with their constituents to make sure that, that they're okay. Whether they can help or not is a different story. And I think that, in the recent conversations that we've had, whether you offer help versus someone taking help is two different things. And so I think the whole fact that you offer help adds value not only to being Jain, but also being a member to Jainism. Furthermore, I think that if we actually focus some effort on helping not only, I would say, our Jain community, but the community at large, we actually get greater visibility in the community that we live in. Because right now we're talking about being Jain, helping Jain. But being Jain doesn't necessarily have to help someone that is Jain. Now, I may be pointing my own viewpoint here, but I think that if you can help the community at large, there's a lot more benefit, not only to being Jain, but also the community knowing who we are.
Sure, absolutely. So, because you think that, you must be very disappointed in whatever reaction or non-reaction the Jain Center had. And I agree with you. We're not talking, that's how we started discussing it, but it certainly isn't limited to helping Jains, because practicing Jainism is helping everybody. Yeah,
well, once again, I don't think I'm disappointed in our Jain Center. I think that I'm intrigued by other religious organizations that reached out to me. So if they're able to do it, how come we're not able to do it?
Right. Questions or comments on anything we discussed today, or anything on your mind?
Well, I'll just add to Nick's point. I agree with you, Nick, and I had similar experience where a few people in the neighborhood we were discussing, actually just on my street, and they were saying the backup plan could be, and again, we didn't have to reach that point, but there was a church next door they were providing shelter and water. So, it would have definitely been something that probably we can consider and do in future.
Well, the issue is in all of this is that, we talk about it after an issue has occurred, right? This is how laws in the country are made too. Something happens and then a law is made from that incident that has usually happened. That's many laws are made like that, right? And, we had Harvey, and I was here during Harvey. I had just moved during Harvey, and I met all my neighbors like within 2 hours. I met all my neighbors. I had just moved, but I knew all 26 of my neighbors by first name in 2 hours, and that community aspect, I feel like as we grow and our next generation, our kids get involved, if we can't make it practical for them, there's part of our religion that we're going to lose. And I don't know if any of you have recently done that survey for Jaina or Jito or one of those. But a lot of those questions are really interesting, what they're asking, is Jainism based on a food diet? It's really interesting that someone's asking you these questions, right? And if you haven't done it, I highly suggest you guys go do it just to understand what someone's trying to capture. It's like a 15-minute survey. It's like 12 pages, but it's pretty interesting to understand why they're trying to do that, to understand where the future of Jainism will lie.
Okay, so some pretty hard questions, and I hate to leave it at that, but we will think on these questions. And remember, the answer to hard questions is not always to throw your hands up and say the problem is too big. The answer to hard questions is to start answering them in a small way, just like Shetu's plumbing example. I'm going to just start donating whatever plumbing stuff I have, and pretty soon people will arrive and say, hey, that's a good plan. I want to be part of this plan. The answer to hard questions is always just us starting the first step. Maybe that's making a document. Maybe that's reaching out to people. The answer to very big problems is always just us doing having a small answer for what we can control. Thank you, everybody, for your time this week. I really appreciate it. It's not something I take for granted.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.